To Virtual Midsummers Carving Demonstration. I'm John Presley, and I've done a lot of carving here in this community and really enjoyed and appreciated how much carving history there is in the community. To have someone continue that history, we have Jennifer Ebling right here, who's going to be whittling away while I talk away. So, Jennifer, what have you got going there?
Well, I'm carving this little man. He's going to hopefully end up looking like a little Tomty. But as you can tell, he doesn't really look like much right now. He's kind of blocky, he's kind of ugly right now. And that's how we start out when we carve these funny little blocky characters. Hopefully we end up with something that looks like this.
And I'm sure of greater quality, but nonetheless, I mean, we're just talking here about Anton Pearson, Norm Malm, among other people. So, oh, okay. Well, you're, the long line of tradition. What's interesting is that Jennifer's one of the few women who have been carving, and we don't have a long history here in this area of women who are carving, although I've known two other women in the area who carve, and so it's kind of cool to have somebody not only of Jennifer's gender, but her age. We recently had a show at the Sanzen Gallery that included local wood carvers, and she's the only non-AARP member. So it's good to see that we've got generational influence as well as, or generational movement as well as gender. Okay, this style of carving is a rough, primitive style. And it originated roughly 1850, 1840s in Sweden, where men who worked in lumber camps in the northern part of Sweden frankly had a lot of time on their hands because it was dark up there. And in their off hours, which in wintertime are long, they would whittle out toys for their kids. And the toys would typically be things like horses or pigs, things like that, things that their kids could play with. And in so doing, they would use their working knives, which would be something like this, which is a heavy knife. It's a tool. It's not meant to be some kind of art object tool or anything of that nature. And so when you use this, you can't make really fine, delicate cuts. And so they just whittle chunks away with their knives and leave large, flat planes. Hence the term flat plane carving. Now, when we talk about large, flat planes, let's use this. And I'll talk about each of these here in just a minute. But this caricature of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, JFK, has, you look here at the pants, and you've got large, flat planes. You've got flat planes here on the shoulder, really everywhere. The face is a little more specific, but it's not smoothed out. There is no sanding to anything like this. You're letting the large, flat planes communicate the character that you're trying to carve. And so, with that, then, out of that is where we get the dollar horse. Is from that tradition, the horses that started being carved as toys for kids became something really kind of special in a clockwork factory in Dalarna. And in this clockwork factory, they would use the extra wood to carve out dollar horses, which frankly their sales reps used to help pay for room and board. It's kind of cool. But it's evolved farther along than that. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, a man called Alex Peterson, who became known as Detterholtern, started carving characters. And he started carving characters in a very rough fashion. They were hardly smooth, they were not smoothed out at all, and many of the characters were simply characters that he knew or that he represented. And he had kind of an odd sense of humor here. There aren't very many people happy in this bridal party. but the large bouquet is covering up another large bouquet, if you will, in his sense of humor. But nonetheless, you get a picture like this, and you just see the rugged, rough-hewn nature of the carving, which really accurately reflects the nature of the people of the time. Again, he carved images of people that were around him all the time. Now, in roughly early part and mid part of the 1920s, an exhibit by Detter Holtern, who is the name of his village, Detterholt, exhibited in the United States. He had several exhibits here, the closest one being in Chicago. And what I've been told is that Jan Malm bought some pieces at that exhibit, brought them to Lindsborg, and Anton Pearson, who had come to Lindsborg to study painting with Berge Sanzane, found them intriguing and really enjoyed them. And he decided, according to Rosie, his daughter, that I can do better. And so a carving legend emerged out of that. I've lived in Lindsborg since 1989, and shortly after that I became acquainted with the carvings of Anton Pearson. He died about 1968, 67, and so I never knew him, but oh my gosh, his carvings just captured me. The capacity for being rough, primitive, and yet being something that really represented people well was something I really enjoyed seeing in those carvings. And it wasn't until a number of years later, actually, that I was able to find a book to help me figure out how I might go about that. We're going to get back to that a bit later. But when we talk about rough-hewn figures, we're talking about, a figure like this, which is an Anton Pearson piece. I just recently acquired this Norm Malm piece that is just amazing in how rough it is, and yet, oh my gosh, I'm just totally drawn to her. There's a family of carvers named Trygg, T-R-Y-G-G. They immigrated from Sweden to Canada and then back to Sweden. And there are about 4 of them that did a lot of carving. I mean, a great deal. Some estimates run over 10,000 carvings among this family. And they carved from roughly the late 20s on up into the 50s. And again, this is a really whimsical character, really rough. You can just see how there are triangular cuts here that represent different kinds of characters of the coat, and then the whimsical smile and the eyes that twinkle even though this is a piece of wood. I really enjoy the Trygg carvings. This one is a carving by one of the Gunnarsson carvers, Sven Gunnarsson in Stockholm, started the family tradition. Urban, his son, started carving when he was 15 professionally, and last time I knew he was still carving. He'd be roughly my age, so I guess it's okay if people my age carve. Yeah. Oh, okay, yeah. So, and they became very well known for carving out political characters. Some of you may remember the old Swedish craft store, and behind the counter they had a line of characters that included, I believe, Winston Churchill and Fidel Castro and Charles de Gaulle, as well as many other well-known political characters. And so, of course, they did the Kennedys. I'm lucky enough to have a JFK and an RFK in my collection. So that gives you some background in terms of the flat plane style. Rough, primitive, no sanding. It's simply something that I think accurately reflects the people of the community. How's the little guy doing?
He's coming along nicely. You can kind of see a little bit of him slowly emerging out of the wood.
Yeah. Nice catch. You don't want to drop the knife, but if you catch it, do it with that hand.
Yeah.
So, okay. When we're talking about doing the flat plane style of carving, again, Jennifer's just got that knife whittling away here. So a lot of people ask me what it is or how long it takes me to do a carving. And so I did this little guy just for that purpose, just to show what it is that the steps are that go into carving the piece and how long it took me for this guy. Every piece is different. So, but with this fellow, we start with I cut out a tracing, in this case a profile, that I trace onto a block of wood and run this through my bandsaw. And so this is what I start carving with. And then and that took me about 30 minutes to sketch out the tracing and then to cut it out on the bandsaw. And then for the next, what did I say here? It looks like 56 minutes for the first stage of carving that comes with this figure that is roughly recognizable at this point. And then after another hour and 30 minutes, then the carving itself is pretty well completed. And by the way, the reason there's a difference in the time is I had to stop sometime. So, and then painting and putting, I put wax on, just an ordinary wax. And that took another hour and 22 minutes. So total time involved in this fellow, 4 hours and 16 minutes. And he's ready to go fishing. Now, I mentioned that I learned initially from a book by a fellow named Harley Refsall. Jennifer and I both use knives that are named for Harley Refsall because he worked with the knife maker to come up with a style that he liked. And so in this particular book, not only talks about the history, but had a carving a figure step by step, which is exactly what I needed. Now, I had been doing some carving, which is, fairly typical of the Midwestern styles. I had a book that helped with that. And I had a different kind of knife, pretty fundamental carving knife. And so what this allowed me to do was get an idea about what it was I needed in terms of how to think about the image and then how to then get it out of the block of wood. And so I won't go through every part of this, but this is where I got started. And it's the way I got started. Now I might mention too that this book is no longer in print, and so he's now come out with another book that also has step-by-step. And this can be gotten at the Hemschlag, at least this is where I got mine. And if you're interested at all too, then the Hemschlag also sells knives that are identical to what I used to start with in my process of learning to carve. So I also had an opportunity to take a class from Harley and to then for a birthday present, my wife bought some private time with him. In that private time, I might mention that one of the things that I wanted to learn how to do was, how do I make somebody look young? Because you look at all of these, even this old guy down here, he looks like he's a little old because of all the craggy qualities of the carving, the primitive flat plane stuff. And so I was particularly interested in learning how to do a Lucia. We worked that one out. What's interesting is the style that I ended up with is not the style that Harley uses. And yet I really like the effect of the style that I use to make a younger character, and particularly a female character. All right. More progress?
A little bit more.
A little bit
A
more.
little bit more.
Oh, okay. By the way, are you going to paint that? I'm setting you up, you know that.
You know, I haven't decided yet.
Okay.
Sometimes I like painting them. Sometimes I just like the look of the plain wood.
You might look at the Anton Pearson piece here, which is not painted. And in fact, when I was talking with Norman Malm about Anton's carvings a number of years ago, Norman died in 2011. He said that Pearson painted his pieces until roughly the late 20s. And it was after that that he started using a variety of other woods and not painting them. And when I first came here, he was best known for using redwood, which is what this is. And what he would do there is he would carve it, and he would use more than a knife. He would use gouges as well. But then he would take a wire brush, and there is between the grains what we would call pith, P-I-T-H, and he would scrape that out with the wire brush, giving this really rugged look to them. Now, one of the things that I really like and always liked about Pearson's carvings, and then learned later on that really everybody who is a practitioner of this style of carving uses this as a means of storytelling. But it's a unique kind of storytelling. It's not a story like you would write out and you set the plot, you set the twist, you set the conclusion. It's the person who sees the carving that decides what the story is going to be. One of the things that I really enjoy is giving demonstrations to groups of kids. Most commonly I'll do that with school groups, and the largest number typically when we have Millfest here. The Friday before that is called Kids Millfest, and school groups come in. They get a variety of experiences, people doing different kinds of things, rope making, corn shucking, spinning, a variety of things of that nature that were characteristic of the skills being used in this area. And so I get to do the carving things. And one of the things that I really like is that I'll take this character and I'll point out, you know, the posture, the shoulders are kind of up, the knees, kind of a knock knee, got his hands in his pockets. And then I cover up part of the mouth and I show it to the kids and I say, okay, what's he doing? And they'll say, oh, he's frowning, or words to that effect. And so I go around a group of 15 to 30 kids and get a variety of responses. And then I cover up that part and I show this part. I say, okay, what's he doing now? Well, he's smiling. And then, of course, all the kids, once I show them the fact that one side's up and one side's down on the mouth, they all try it. I say, okay, try it without using your hands. Nobody's managed to do that yet. Easier with a sharp knife, I think. But nonetheless, and then we talk about, what's this guy doing? And it's great fun to get the stories about that. And one of the pieces that I've done that I really enjoy is this little guy. His title is Strolling in a Kansas Breeze. And I don't tell the kids the title, but what I do is say, okay, what's going on here? And most of the time it's stuff like, oh, he's walking and it's really windy and he's having to lean forward, he's having to use his walking stick. I've had people talk about it snowing. It's great fun just to hear what the kids come up with in terms of the stories. And every year, really every group that I work with comes up with some different twist on the story. But again, a rough figure, and yet it prompts the stories. So what story are you telling?
Well, he's going to be eventually holding a little candle. He's walking in the dark and he's trying to find his way.
Like many of us these days. Now, One of the things that I always emphasize is that when I carve, I wear a glove. You'll see Jennifer's wearing a glove. She wouldn't have stayed in my class if she didn't. So, there. I'm not a bully, but when it comes to safety issues, I think it's pretty critical. And in fact, what I do when I'm demonstrating is that I'll use this knife, and as you see, it's effective. And I'll say to the kids, okay, is this knife sharp? And they're going, oh yeah, yeah. So I put down the wood, and then I press the knife into my hand. Oh! So at any rate, the knife is essential. It's really good for guarding against slices, cuts of that nature. It doesn't protect you very well from stabbing yourself, however, because it's a knit. It's made out of Kevlar, and I like the gripper dots on it. So the knife that I use, we get it from the same place, a guy named Del Stubbs, and I just noticed this, but the blade edge is typically straight across, unlike some other knives that you would see where the edge is curved, such as this. So you can see this is my cutting edge here, this is my cutting edge here. And so this really helps with the flat plane style of carving. Now, what I just noticed about this is I've been doing a number of carvings lately, and by stropping this, it takes off a little bit of metal each time, and so I've got a slight curve in there, which I'm going to have to get fixed. But yeah, there's a fellow in Minnesota that makes these knives according to the specifications of Harley Brush Saw, and so this is the only Harley I've ever known, or ever owned. Actually, I've known others. Okay, so then the next step, what I do, particularly at the kids' Millfest, is I do a very rough, very brief carving. And in the process, have the kids, first of all, guess what I'm going to be doing. So I'm not going to tell you, not yet. And, you know, it's fascinating because when I have them guess, they start guessing the minute I get the knife to the wood. Oh, it's a pencil! Here I've shown them all these neat carvings, and they think I'm carving a pencil. But, and then I'll get something like, somebody will come up with it's a snake, or, but what's fascinating is, by and large, it takes a little while for them to realize what it is that I'm actually doing, what I'm trying to create out of this. So but what you can see that in this process, I've got triangular chunks of wood that are coming out, and they go all over the creation, which is why my shop is in the basement. However, I still walk in that shop, and so it is amazing where the chips frequently end up in our house. Margaret keeps talking about having me buy one of these sheds to put out in the yard as a carving studio. She keeps talking about it in terms of wanting me to have a better space. I think it has a lot more to do with keeping the chips out of the house. But, you know, she's not here to defend herself on that, so I'll take advantage of that. So, and I usually stop here and say, okay, what have we got? And again, I get a variety of guesses. Very few of them are going to be very close. Although there always happens to be some precocious youngster who is very quick-witted, has a quick eye, and figures out where I'm going with this. Okay, then I'll stop here too, and then what you'll notice is, again, most of these are triangular cuts right here. And it's going to become even more prominent. As I get a few more here, this is a little bigger piece of wood than I typically use for this because I wanted to make sure I had something that was visible. And when I finish the next set of cuts, it's usually pretty obvious to the kids where I'm going with this. Because now I've got this. But once again, it's flat plane carving. I've got lots of flat planes here. And the other thing that's kind of intriguing about this is that early on, I didn't worry, I worried too much about making faces symmetrical. And yet, how many of us as teenagers looked at ourselves in the mirror and saw parts of our body that just didn't seem to fit the other parts of our body? Fact is, humans are rarely very symmetrical. We have different characteristics, not only from each other, but within ourselves. And so being symmetrical is perhaps not the best way to approach a carving, even of a face or of a person. One of the things that I've gotten into in the last few years, making carvings of, based on real people. One of the things I also have to be careful of in that is that while these can be considered caricatures, I don't want to insult the person I'm trying to represent in the carving. So we get to this point, it's pretty obvious. I've got a face in process. But once again, primarily cutting out wedges, triangles, is getting us to this point. Now, this is a stage where I have a lot of fun with the kids, because I say, okay, now he's ready for his eyes. What shape is his eye, or eyes? And I'll get ovals, I'll get circles, I'll get golf balls. I got football one time. Young man's destined for greatness, I'm sure. And so I said, what I haven't heard anybody say is triangles. And everybody goes, triangles? My eyes don't look like triangles. Well, then I show them that I cut out a triangle from each eye, and then I show it to them and say, does he have eyes? Yeah. And so what we end up with here is they go along with the carving, they put in what they expect to see, which is true really of all of us when we're talking about any kind of art form like this. So that what we got here is something I've done in approximately 5 minutes, represents an image that people can relate to, and maybe even start their own story. But one of my favorite stories is that in doing this, I don't worry about ears. And a young lady in the second grade class goes, he doesn't have any ears, how can he hear? And I said, well, first of all, it's a piece of wood, he's not going to hear anything anyway. Secondly, you've got 2 ears, how well do you hear? She goes, not so good. And her teacher, who's a friend of mine, was at the back of the room going, Telling the stories. That's what we do with this. But we don't do the telling. You do the telling. So, what's your story working on there?
Well, he's coming along here. Just a moment, and I can give the little guy a set of eyes.
So do I need to keep talking here?
I'd say
And
too much longer.
not too many people ask me that.
Nope. There you go.
Sweet. Oh yeah, you've got your candle guy there. Now,
Yeah.
how are you going to put in the candle?
Well, if I drill a little hole through the top, I can take a little toothpick. Carve a little candle and stick it in his hand.
Yep. You know, one of the things that I learned, I don't even remember where, is that you can take a drill bit and glue it into a dowel rod and use that as a hand drill to help with this process. So, well, that gives you an idea about wood carving in the Smoky Valley. We've got a long history just in the valley with Andrew Pearson, Norman Mong, Jennifer Ebling, and who will continue this long history. But the history comes from Sweden, it comes from Canada, and it really is a part of the culture that makes up Lindsborg and its Swedish heritage. Thank you for watching. Hope this was fun for you. It certainly was for me. Take care, and thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.